Good evening, dear friends. Thank you for checking in again, second time this evening for some of us. We're looking at the second Sunday in Advent, which is today, December 6th. It's also St. Nicholas Day. That would be a whole topic in itself, not going into that, but just good to remember. It's also the day upon which those of us who are connected to the Christian community think about one of our founders, and the second leader of the whole Christian community, Emil Bock, who died on December 6, 1959. Many years ago, one wonders if such a personality is out there somewhere watching over us and maybe even helping out now and then. Emil Bock. Last time, the first Sunday in Advent, we took a look at the mineral kingdom and ended with the picture of the desert, Christ's temptation in the desert, this dry, rocky, sparsely populated, sparsely planted, vegetated area. And we can think perhaps today a little bit more of the plant life in the desert. And anyone who's spent some time in the desert will be thinking of the cactus, of course. We'll be thinking of those plants that grow very low to the ground. And those who do get a bit higher are very scrawny. They can live on very little. That's the amazing thing about the plants in the desert. A little bit closer to home would be the Christmas tree, or as we call it in our chapels in the Christian community, the Advent tree. An undecorated pine, fir, spar tree that stands next to the altar and reminds us of this kind of pure, almost paradisical state that enters our liturgical life with Advent. So what is a plant? And what has it got to do with us moving toward Christmas? If we just look a little bit, fifth grade science, the plants form an independent, natural kingdom on the earth alongside the minerals and the animals and human beings and all sorts of mixed specimens. The plant itself is threefold. There are the roots, there is the stem, and then the leaf and everything that happens after the leaf comes out. The blossom, the fruit, the seed. All of that is part of this whole leaf process, or this outbursting of life from the stem. So what does a plant need to survive? It needs water, it needs sunlight, and it needs nourishment. Sounds like us, kind of. Huh? It's a living being. The plant benefits from a master gardener, or at least, let's say, a disciple of the master gardener who's willing to give it water, to provide it with sunlight, to give it nourishment. Probably many of us have plants in our house, around our house. If we don't have our own plants, I'm sure many of us enjoy looking out the window, taking in the plants across the street, taking a walk through the park, or going to special places where special plants grow. The totality of the plant world is often thought of as the flora. A beautiful name, sounds a little bit like flower. It was a goddess in ancient times. Plants often form communities. There'll be a whole bunch of pampas grass or elderberries or other plants where the seeds fall into the ground, and the natural affinity of the plants causes them to end up in the same place. And then they stay there, except when they go to seed, and the seed is caught up by the wind and carried off somewhere else. So the concept of the native plant is only really worthwhile when you say a seed falls in an area where it really can't grow and can't flourish. We'd say it's not native. If we look at it from the point of view of spiritual science or anthroposophy, as many of you are familiar with, we would say the plant has a physical body. It has a body that we can see and feel and touch. We can taste it. We eat the plant or the fruits or the flower or the leaves or the seeds. We take that into our own physical body with our mouth, or we rub it to oil and use it for healing. The plant has a life body, and this distinguishes it already from the mineral. The mineral exhibits no life process when we observe it with our usual vision. Whereas if we see the plant, you and I may not see actual movement of liquid or growth, but if you're growing little seedlings and you plant them in the earth, you notice after 2 or 3 days the first little shoot is coming up, and the shoot grows, and the first leaves appear, and the next set of leaves, and so on and so forth, so that we can say there is a life process going on, a life body, a body of life forces, or as we would say with the anthroposophical terminology, the etheric body. And one wonders then, if we consider that the human being has still higher and more refined bodies, where is that in the plant? Could it be that that soul body is still not completely connected to the plant, but lives in the world around it, so that we might say its astral body or its star body, its soul body, is still in the cosmic realm, still in the universe. And we can kind of see that coming into the plant when the blossom appears and color shows up. Fruit comes to being in many plants, whether it be the wheat or the banana or the pineapple. Sunflower seeds we could even think of as a fruit. And then the plant dies off. And this can be a very valuable exercise to observe a plant through its whole cycle, whether you've planted it as a seed or it's a plant that's already there when springtime comes and it kind of awakens again, lifts its head up to greet the sun and to take in the sunlight and to start a new growth process. You might say the plants that way are woven into the whole fabric of the earth and the cosmos, much more than the mineral, where we say the leaves open themselves to the sunlight and the blossom starts as a bud and begins to open itself to sunlight, to the forces of the stars and the planets, day and night, and wind and weather and rain, dryness, suffers from the drought, perhaps. And we begin to get a feeling for the earth itself as a living organism, as a being that's not just under our feet, but is also connected to the greater universe, partially through us as human beings, through our conscious awareness. We'll get to that in a couple of weeks. But observe the plants. Those of us who are now in the northern hemisphere may have a harder time to do that because so many plants, the trees are bare. The gardens where people have cultivated flowers and bushes and beautiful things during the summer, spring, summer, and fall, much of that has died away. We live in a kind of plant desert in the northern hemisphere at this point. If you're in the southern hemisphere, of course, you're in the springtime, and you're able to observe these processes where the plant life opens up and begins to bloom and blossom. So observe the dying away of the plant life. Let that resonate in your soul, in your thoughts. How does that feel when you spend a minute or 2 or 3 looking at a tree with its bare branches or a bush? Then if you go closer, you see this wonderful appearance in many plants that you can already see the tiny little buds that have come forth when the leaves or the blossoms fell off. so that the next cycle is already preparing itself. That will go to sleep in the winter. Let's hope it doesn't come out too soon, that some sort of untimely warmth comes along and brings out leaves or blossoms too early. And then another picture that I discovered studying Rudolf Steiner recently is the idea that the plants are there, they grow on the surface of the earth, and we can observe their blossoming and blooming, also their dying away, perhaps also being cut, harvested, where these life forces then disappear or dissipate or unify themselves with the surroundings. But there's also a picture that he gives of the roots of the plant being connected to the very heart of the earth. And in the particular passage I was reading, he spoke of the rose. We can all imagine a rose bud, tightly closed when it first begins to appear on the rose bush, and how that slowly opens in the summertime. And once it's completely open, it already begins to die away. The petals dry up, they fall off, or we cut the blossom off, or we allow it to form a rose hip in particular plants. And then he gives the complementary picture of the roots of the rose bush reaching not physically, but with their life forces and with these soul forces that are not completely connected to the plant, reaching to the very center of the earth and forming there a light rose, a rose composed of light, which is the inner force that enlivens the plant. So not only are light, warmth, nourishment, water, rain coming to the plant from outside, from the cosmic realms, but also a kind of light body rises up out of the center of the earth, and these two forces meet in the plant itself, which kind of says to me, that's perhaps a reason why we so much love to have plants around us, in our yards if we have a yard. Even the potted plants, the pot and the windowsill are not going to hinder the spiritual forces from joining the plant from the center of the earth. You might think of the center of the earth as being a kind of cosmic or a kind of etheric garden where so many plants in their essence grow. Not the outer plant that we know as the rose or the sunflower or the corn stalk or the beans, but the inner nature of those beings, of those plants, those friends. And now just a little bit about the plant in the Bible. If you would thumb through the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, and let's say every reference to plant was in red letters, you would be seeing red, literally, by the end of the first half of the Old Testament. So many times, plant life is used to describe soul processes, to describe the experiences of human beings, the feelings that they have, the fears, the joys, the fulfillment, the longing. There's a beautiful passage from Hosea in the 14th chapter I'd just like to share. I believe this is Yahweh speaking to his people. I will be like the dew to Israel. He will blossom like a lily. Like a cedar of Lebanon, he will send down his roots. His young shoots will grow. His splendor will be like an olive tree. His fragrance like a cedar of Lebanon. People will dwell again in his shade. They will flourish like the grain. They will blossom like the vine. Israel's fame will be like the wine of Lebanon. The shade, to spend time under the shade of a great tree. How often have we not done that in the summer when it's hot? or perhaps to get out of the rain when the leaves are on the tree, to shelter under a large tree. What a beautiful sign of friendship that can be. Friendship that the plant kingdom shows us human beings, and which we are able to receive and to accept. And then there's the picture of the Mount of Olives, this olive grove where Christ often retreated to in many times, especially in those last hours of his life. He went there with the disciples. The Gospel of John records in the 14th through the 17th chapters the so-called last discourses, which take place in this garden, this place where olives grow, where he went to pray just before his crucifixion, where olives were grown, picked and pressed in large mills. You can almost say this is what was happening to Christ in his last hours, that the universe, the Father, was beginning to treat him like the olives that were about to be picked, harvested, gathered together, and pressed out for their oil. Crushed. Jesus was about to be hung on the cross, a cross made of wood, by the way, another plant, where he would endure on our behalf the pressing deeds of humanity which come crashing down on him as he hangs on the cross. If you look at the olive tree itself, I've seen only a few in my day. Perhaps some of you have been around olives more. You can feel free to add something in the comments. But the olive tree do not grow very tall. They're also trimmed so that they're easy to harvest. They live for a long time. They produce fruit for a long time, and they become quite gnarled and bent. They're hollow inside, but the tree continues to have the life forces and the nourishment from the earth go up and down and back and forth. Its root system is quite extensive and allows it to survive in the particular climates where it grows. It's Greece and Israel and Turkey. It needs a lot of care. So this olive tree is something that has a deep symbolism, I think, for our Christian path. So think of the Bible as a plant which comes into the earth from the cosmos into the Garden of Eden through the creative word of Elohim in the first chapters of Genesis, and modulates itself through the experiences of human beings, accompanies human beings, tended to by human beings, harvested, consumed, contributing to the physical and the etheric development of human beings, even to the soul forces. And then we move into the New Testament, the wooden cross upon which Christ is crucified. The garden in which his tomb is located, the sheer amount of life forces that would have been arising out of the earth in that springtime in just outside of Jerusalem. The resurrection, which then takes place to fulfill the entire earth and all of its beings with new life. Many of these considerations can arise in our souls when we think of the second Sunday in Advent and the kingdom of the plants. And then the ultimate puzzling question, which I'd like to give you to take with you this week, which just began to occur to me this afternoon. When we look at the very end of the Bible, the book of Revelation, we spoke of this last week in connection with the mineral kingdom. The New Jerusalem, described in chapters 21 and 22, the very last words of the New Testament, are described in terms of minerals. Minerals form the walls of the city of— the buildings are described as being gold, transparent gold. The streets are described as being gold. I wonder, could it be that the mineral kingdom, through everything that it experiences, connections with human beings in the time between the creation story in Genesis and, we might say, a fulfillment of that story in the book of Revelation, if the mineral kingdom has not gone through such a development that it becomes a living, life force exuding part of the city, the New Jerusalem. It's just a question that arose in my mind this afternoon. Something to ponder. Next week, the third Sunday of Advent, we will have a look at the animal kingdom. I wish you all a blessed Sunday, or Monday if it's that time already, wherever you are, wherever you're listening, around the whole earth. Thank you for listening.